Okay, so welcome. I'd like to just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Samantha Gomez, and I'm a personal development and leadership coach, career counselor, and I also provide life transition support to a diverse client base. I want to introduce Kelly Metzgar. I'm going to go more fully into her bio and who she is, why she's sharing a moment with us in a minute. But this is Kelly. So I'm a certified trainer in personality dimensions, an instructor and workshop facilitator on positive space and LGBT awareness. And I also have developed different workshops to help my clients on job search, career transition, civility and professionalism in the workplace, and also introduction to project management. Now, a little bit about me, very important part of my mission and purpose on this planet is to raise awareness to serious issues that face society today. So this is one of several collaborations that I am doing in video form. I'm an advocate and I support and I provide a voice for those that feel isolated, oppressed, and I help and coach those that their greatest desire is to be themselves. So why are these matters close to my heart? Well, myself, for many years, I was lost and struggled to find my voice, to live a life that reflected the person that I am inside. And I was raised in an oppressive religion where I felt pressured to submit to rules and societal norms that dictated everything from my behavior to how I dressed, the friendships I chose, and also career and life decisions that I made. So I was not able to celebrate the holidays. I was discouraged from interacting with the world at large in a close, intimate way like you would a colleague or friends outside of the religion. I was not able to do so. So at the age of 28, I actually decided I could no longer live that life, and I walked away from the only world I knew. It was quite the process. I was able to overcome my fears and slowly find my place in the world. I went back to school and was able to obtain a college diploma, something that I had always desired to do. And I began to form solid friendships that were genuine, unconditional, and that they accepted me and they accept me for who I am. It has been 16 years since I left a world where I had no voice. And now I help others through my coaching practice to find their voice and challenge the fears and their beliefs that hold them back from living the life of their dreams. So this is a part of a video series I've developed to address issues that impact clients, contacts in my network, friends, and society at large. Thank you in advance for taking the precious time out of your day to watch this video, and it is my hope that you enjoy it and share it with others that you may think will benefit. I'm honored to introduce today one of the most courageous souls I have met, Kelly Metzgar. Kelly, through sharing her life story with us today, opens our eyes and hearts to the need to advocate for the LGBTQI rights and help those struggling with fear and oppressive environments that prevent them from being themselves. So I'm just going to read Kelly's bio before we get started, so bear with me. I don't want to make any mistakes. So Kelly, for most of her life, Kelly Metzgar struggled with gender identity issues and gender dysphoria. She joins us today to share her life growing up as male, overcoming familial and societal pressures of fulfilling that role and the impact that had on her throughout her life. She is open about overcoming depression, suicidal ideation, and the emerging into a fuller life as female. She shares her thoughts on assisting others struggling with emotions as cisgender or transgender, non-binary, heterosexual, or LGBTQI+. Kelly is a transgender woman living in the Adirondack North Country of upstate New York. Kelly is co-founder and executive director of the Adirondack North Country of upstate New York. Sorry, did I read that right? No, Kelly is a co-founder and executive director of the Adirondack North Country Gender Advocacy and Education. So it's ANCGAE. Is that right, Kelly?
So I am co-founder, executive director of Adirondack North Country Gender Alliance, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit. And I have my separate advocacy and education program, Adirondack North Country Advocacy and Education. So we're able to actually go out and do professional development trainings on the local, regional, New York State, and national levels here in the United States.
Great, thank you. So ANCJE provides educational programs focused on the transgender, gender non-binary, lesbian, gay, bi, pansexual, and intersex advocacy. And Kelly speaks to people and provides professional development training programs at regional colleges, universities, regional religious, civic, and business groups. And she's presented at transgender and LGBT conferences on both the New York State and national levels. She actively participates in events focusing on the LGBTQI and transgender rights legislation issues, including the passage of Gender Equality Non-Discrimination Act in New York State. Kelly believes in allowing transgender, gender non-binary, and all LGBTQI people live as their true and authentic self. She seeks to end the stigma that there is something wrong or unacceptable in being LGBTQI+. And she strives to educate the public on gender identity, expression, and sexual orientation issues to promote understanding, acceptance of LGBTQI+, people in all aspects of life, including schools, society, and employment on the job. So Kelly, I am going to turn it over to you so you can please share your story, and then we're going to follow up with some question and answers to help our audience and perhaps help those that either are struggling in a similar situation or want to be of support of someone who is.
Perfect. Thank you, Samantha, for including me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak with your followers. I think a few things you need to know is I was assigned male at birth. And growing up as a boy and being raised as a male, there were many familial and societal messages and expectations that I had to face as both a youth, a teen, and a young adult. My parents were traditional, conservative, Irish Catholic mother. My father was German Lutheran. I was adopted as a baby and raised as the eldest son. In fact, my original name, I was named after my adopted father, and he is my father in every single way. I was expected to set an example for my younger siblings. I always had to have the good grades in school, the A's and B's. C's were totally frowned on. They were not good. Our family name and reputation were very important to my family. And I was always told never to do anything to shame that family name. So as the eldest male in our extended family, that put a lot of pressure on me to conform to familial and societal expectations. I've lived as a son, as a brother, as a nephew, the eldest male cousin. As a teen, young adult, I had several girlfriends. As I say often, I never identified as gay, was never interested in boys or men. I've always had girlfriends. I fulfilled the traditional role as a husband and a father. I have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. I was never effeminate. I was never girly in my other life. For all appearances, I was a regular hetero cis-gendered male, and I always expressed and behaved as such.
Thank you, Kelly. So we'll move on to the questions, and thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. So the first question. So Kelly, you mentioned that you were assigned male at birth, and obviously growing up as a boy and being raised as a male, what familial and societal messages and expectations did you experience as a youth, teen, and adult?
I think I just expressed some of those. I was always expected to be the perfect son,
Yeah.
to be the perfect brother, to leave that role model, and to do what my family expected as a male in all different ways. And as the extended family, as I said, I was the eldest of all the eldest male of all the extended family. So you were expected to be a certain way,
Right.
to not to fulfill those male roles in the family. And as a husband, as a father, you had to have those expectations fulfilled that people expected. I was a professional throughout my entire life. I was in professional IT. And that comes with a certain expectation of how you dress, how you behave, the type of job you have, how you interact with others. So all of this played a big impact in both my family, my marriages, my children, and just life in general.
Okay. So how you talked about the impact. What more can you tell me about the impact it had on your life?
I had to keep a very deep, dark secret all of my life, out of fear of being exposed. I basically had to live a lie. I lived in hiding. I lived in fear of exposure to my family, my friends, my girlfriends, my spouses, my children, my employers. I was ashamed of who I was. When I was young, the term transgender did not even exist. So many people of my generation, when we get together and we talk, we all say the same thing. We did not know what was wrong with us. And we felt that there was something really wrong. Because boys don't dress in girls' clothes. Boys don't wear makeup. Boys are expected to behave a certain way. And so when you're trying to live a dual gender life as male on one side for society and the world to see, and you know that there's something else inside of you, it created a lot of, and we use the term dysphoria, which means a disconnect. And so trying to hide who you were, live that lie. I lived in shame because boys and men don't do this sort of thing, or at least not respectable men. So it created a lot of anxiety. And that was not socially acceptable. So over decades, many decades, and I still have some issues today. I am still somewhat fearful to trust others, to let people in to experience or know me totally. So it's created a lot of issues that I'm still struggling with today, if you will, and I'm working my very best to get over those.
Thank you for being honest about that, because it's so important to know that it's a work in progress, right? For those who are
Absolutely.
experiencing it, it doesn't just come, it doesn't come easily. So, what kind of a support system did you have as a male?
Basically, when I was younger, I had my family, my parents, my sisters and brothers. I have a younger sister and two younger brothers, and a very big extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, and of course now we have little cousins and grand cousins, and it's a very big extended family between us. Um, and I always had that male persona.
Mhm.
So in our my family itself, emotions were not something that were generally expressed.
Okay.
My dad was very strict German heritage. My grandparents came from Germany. On my mom's side, our family came from Ireland. So there was not a lot of emotions expressed in our families, especially emotions of love and support and understanding. We never really had that when we were growing up. And it was actually only when my dad came into his 70s, 80s, that he actually started hugging and
Wow.
showing emotional feelings. And I didn't know what to do with it. Here was this man who I loved, who I respected, who I admired, who I shared his name. And suddenly he wanted to give me a hug when we were leaving.
Mm.
I lived 7.5 hours from my parents, 440 miles. So I didn't get to see them often. And when I took my children down there, it was very hard for them to leave their grandchildren. And so as my dad got older and he wanted to be more emotional, it was hard because I hadn't grown up with that and I really didn't know how to process that. But as the eldest male, I had that same standoffishness, if you will.
Mhm. I'm so glad
Men
you,
did not show emotion and affection. That was something that was hard.
yeah, I'm so glad you bring that up, Kelly, because it's something that I observe in my coaching practice. You know, a common theme with the men in my coaching practice is that struggle
Yes.
with emotion, and how, shameful, oftentimes shame or embarrassment, or they feel that they need to, conceal that side of them. And even when emotion, is brought forth, they're not sure quite what to do. And so these are topics, that's a topic that I'm going to have a separate video on as well. But I'm so glad that you've brought that up, because that is a real problem that we're seeing in society today, is how to manage these healthy, natural emotions and express them in a healthy way, as opposed to suppressing them, or dealing with, the emotions with alcohol, or with other things that sort of, to try to numb the pain. Right.
And as a man in my former life, I was not able to show that, and I feel bad because there were times, especially with my own children, I wish I could have shown that, but that was not something that I was necessarily comfortable with.
Mhm.
And at the time when my children were growing up, um, there had to be a bit of distance between the father and the children, because you didn't want to be accused of um, anything inappropriate. So I was always on guard, especially with my daughter and my daughter's friends, to keep that emotional distance, even though I wanted to be able to show those emotions to my daughter, especially when she was young. It affected a lot of things throughout the course of my life and when I had my children.
Thanks, Kelly. So was it something significant that occurred in your life when you realized that some type of change was needed?
Absolutely. And I am not proud of this part of my life. It was a very dark part of my life, but I have to acknowledge it. I am not saying anything now that I have not said in 100 different presentations. But in 2010 and 2011, those were two very, very difficult years for me. In 2010, I was in the process of ending a very long and bitter divorce that had gone on for a number of years. I was very worried about my finances. The cost of the divorce was getting into the tens and twenties of thousands of dollars. I was afraid of losing my house, my home that I've had here in the Adirondacks for many decades. I lost a very important relationship in 2010. And those were devastating to me. In 2011, I sunk into a very deep depression. I started drinking. I was suicidal. I had two plans for suicide. I had the means, the ability, the intent to carry them out. I had a dry run or a practice, if you will, because I was so sure that this was going to happen. I cleaned out my house. I was giving things away. I sent 15 van loads of things to the dump. I was making plans to end my life. Again, I'm not proud of that, but I have to acknowledge that is part of my history. As I said, I did have a dry run. I went through the steps so that when I was going to execute my plan, my second plan, I was not going to bail. I knew what to expect ahead of time. So I would not freak out, if you will, and then that I was going to be able to carry it through. So I went through a complete dry run. I didn't have a lot of friends or family who provided comfort. I had three wonderful people in my life at that time, and there was only three, and I credit them for saving me. I was isolating. I was hiding. I always wanted to be alone. And at work, I opened my mouth a little too much. And my HR manager called me in on the Friday before Christmas Eve. He said, we've heard some talk around the organization. Are you going to be here after Christmas? And I told him, I don't know.
Wow.
And that was Christmas Eve of 2011. And he says, I want you here. I want you here when I come back from Michigan. And we're going to start to do things together. And so, as I said, there were three people who I really credit to saving my life. One of the images that I shared with you, and I hope you share with others, is a picture of a gentleman ascending a staircase. And the staircase splits into three separate stairways. One stairway that led to the left was my stairway to suicide and death, which I was very happy to do. The second stairway, which was towards the center, was to be able to live the same life that I was living, a dual gender life, neither male nor female, somewhere in between, not necessarily happy, but at least I would be alive. And it's the life that I had led all the many decades before. So I was used to it. It wasn't a good life. It wasn't a happy life. It was a life where I was still living in fear, shame, and hiding, but I would be alive. The third staircase that went off to the right, if you will, and I always said that was the right path, was
smile. I love that.
I really had to think, if I was going to live and if I was going to be happy, how could I do that? And there was only one answer, and that was to transition into a life that would make me happy. And to me, that was to transition to a female life. So between literally Christmas of 2011 to New Year's of 2012, I had to make that decision. And I made the decision to live. And once I flipped literally that mental switch in my head, I now had a plan. And so I got my ears pierced. A simple thing for a woman to go get her ears pierced. For me, it was a major decision.
For sure. For sure.
It was like the first step of having a female was just to get my ears pierced.
Yeah.
I started letting my hair grow out.
Yeah.
Later that year, I began cross-sex hormones. So I started taking spirulactone, finasteride, and estradiol.
Okay.
And as I tell people, it was better than Prozac. Because finally my hormone levels came into place, came into balance. My brain was finally coming to a level that made me happy with the estrogen. I was balanced out. My mood improved. The depression went away. The suicide ideation went away. And I now finally had a plan for living.
Beautiful.
And considering where I had been, that was humongous. It was a humongous step forward. As I tell everybody all the time, the best drugs in the world for me were estradiol, finasteride, and spirulactone that really evened out my hormone levels, my brain chemistry, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kelly. You know, I want to just touch on what you mentioned about the HR manager and approaching you. A few years back, I went through suicide prevention training and the importance of having those candid conversations, because they talk about how, you know, men are generally more effective at carrying out suicide.
Yes.
And so the key is asking the questions. Have you thought about suicide? Do you have a plan? You know, have you practiced it? And having those candid conversations where you can feel the person out and say, okay, this is a concern, or no, I'm not thinking about suicide. And then, you know, okay, then, you know, but you, depending on the response that you get, you know, it helps you to assess the situation.
I would lie.
Did you? Yeah, it happened.
If someone asked me that, and they did, I would lie.
Mm-hmm.
I would give them a false positive.
Mm-hmm.
because this was something that was so private to me that I could not share that with anyone. And at that time, I certainly was not ready, willing, or able to share with anyone my gender dysphoria. So in my particular case, I would have lied about that. I'm not saying that's a good thing.
No.
I know after the fact, that's not a good thing. But I was not in a good place.
Right.
And sometimes to require rational thought for someone who is in that place is not a realistic expectation.
Yeah.
I know when I was seeing my counselor, she wanted me to sign a suicide pact that I would call if I felt that way, and I refused. I said no. I said, if I am that far gone, the fact that I signed this little piece of paper is not going to change my thoughts or plans. And I know that now because I now know how far down deep I was. And for me, and I can't speak for anyone else, I had to get myself out of that pit. And it was a long, hard struggle. But making the decision to live and making the decision to live as my authentic self was something that only I could do. And you need to have those friends, those support systems in place. And men don't typically have that. And so besides the work that I do on LGBTQ, I am very sensitive to suicide and suicidal ideation. I am very sensitive to people who are suffer from alcohol, chemical dependency, chemical addiction. So, these are some of the other aspects that I don't talk about a lot, but I'm very cognizant and very supportive of people who are going through that, and to tell my story and to work with them and to say it's okay to be and go through this, and offer that support.
Thanks, Kelly. So you talk about your support network previously. So how did your support network expand or change after your gender transition?
So there were many transitions. So I went through, my first was my social transition. And for me, that went from living as a male, which I had in my other life, to socially transitioning to female. So what that meant was that without physically changing my body, I presented as Kelly. My rebirth day is November 1st of 2014. That was the day that Kelly came and lived full time. That other person was no longer there. It was now Kelly 24/7. And so what I heard from people here in my community was, we are so happy for you. You deserve to be happy and to live your own life. And I only heard positive replies from my community people. And in fact, what they said often was, we've been waiting for you to tell us for months. They could see the changes that the hormones had done to my body. They could see the physical changes that were taking place. They didn't understand why I had earrings, why my hair was long, why my physical body was changing, my face was changing, everything about me was changing. They didn't understand that, but when I came out, as female, then suddenly everything sort of came together. And so from the community here in my area, it was all very positive. My family, for the most part, was accepting. My mom, my sisters, my female cousins, they didn't understand at first, but it took a while for them to come on board, especially my mom. My medical transition was very limited. My friends and here where I live were very supportive. My mom, my sister was very hostile. They did not agree. They did not accept it. And I remember the Saturday night before I left for Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. I had a very unpleasant argument with my mom about my transition, and I hung the phone up on her. I could not have that negativity. She accepted me socially, but the fact that I was actually going to change my physical body was too much for her. And I couldn't have that. So among the community members, the medical transition went good. Family members was iffy. But it was a process. I've become involved in a lot of LGBTQ plus issues here in this area. So part of my transition, part of my support that I had to develop here in the North Country was to become involved in events for the LGBTQ community. I started my not-for-profit, Adirondack North Country Gender Alliance. We provide LGBTQ support for people here in my area. I began speaking on LGBTQ plus issues in professional development trainings at colleges, universities, groups. I've done 2 New York State conferences. I've done 3 US national conferences. I'm here to provide support for people in our area. So on that part, for me to give support to others has been wonderful. For me to give out of myself, to pay forward what I received, has been very personally rewarding. On my own personal, I really don't have a big support system for myself. I have many good transgender friends throughout the country, throughout the world, literally throughout the world. I'm part of an international sorority of trans women. But, you know, those people are far away. Mm-hmm. I don't have a local support system for myself. I have my 2 little fur babies, my doggies, Lexi and Sable, who are here in the room with me tonight.
We heard them earlier.
They are my big support system. Come here. For your listeners, this is my little baby Sable. She's 5 months old, so this is one of my big supports. But I don't have a big support system here for myself. I've had several friends who were very close to me, but due to their different circumstances, they've passed on. Those were people who knew me before transition, and so that's it's hard to lose some of those relationships. And sometimes, you know, I still lead a very private, isolated life. Now, whether that's a carryover from my former male life, it very well may be. You can't just, you don't come from one life to the other and there's totally change.
No.
So there are still some trust issues that remain. I'm very cautious of who I let in, very selective, although people who come to my house now know that I am transgender, so I don't have to hide that. I've been hurt and disappointed many times, so my emotional walls are still up there. But this is still a work in process. Transitioning didn't change everything in my life. I have a lot of things that I still need to work on, and I am continually a work in process. And I think that's an important point to make. I'm happier now than I ever have been. I'm involved with the community at large, and I know I still have my own personal work that I need to work on.
Amazing, Kelly. So many people fear change and the unknown, not willing or able to make changes in their lives in order to be happy or reach their next big dream. How big a role did fear play in your decision to transition genders, and how did you overcome those fears?
The fear that I overcame was living as my male unhappy self. I just shared my suicide ideation. And that was a big if, I was to live and to be happy, how could I do that? So once I overcame that fear of living, as I said, I flipped that mental switch. There was actually no fear in transitioning. I finally had a goal. I finally had a purpose. One of the posters that I shared with you was a wonderful quote from Dr. Seuss. I use these everywhere I go. And it basically said, be who you are and say what you feel, for those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. And what that was saying to me was to live your life. Don't worry what other people say. Those who don't accept you, you don't need them in your life. Accept those people who do accept you. Those are the people you want to hold on to. And that gave me strength. So when I overcame that depression, overcame that suicidality, as I said, when I started those cross-sex hormones, my life just became so much better. My moods evened out. The depression went away. The suicide thoughts went away. Finally, my body, my mind, and my spirit were coming into one whole, happy, unified person. And it gave me confidence that I needed to proceed. My fear was in living, and living in the wrong gender. Transitioning was a blessing. It was a freeing. I was able to free who I was, and I didn't care anymore because I became important.
Wow.
My needs became important. I became selfish, if you will.
Powerful.
I found my way to life, living, and happiness.
That's beautiful. You know, Kelly, you and I have had many discussions about how I can relate living a lie and living another life because of the, religion that I grew up in. And, when you make that shift to living for yourself and being selfish as opposed to giving to others, but you know that in your heart, you desire another life and you give yourself that opportunity. As scary as it is to look into, to think, okay, what has to happen before the once you make that decision, it's joy. Like I remember I wasn't so worried about the people I'd leave behind or what I'd leave behind. It was that I couldn't picture living that life any longer.
Right.
I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't see myself another 10 years like that.
Exactly. When I made that mental switch, I never looked back. I never regretted my decision. It was a way forward. Um, I've never looked back, and I've never regretted that decision.
That's beautiful. And I want to just touch on how, and I'm sure for those that are listening that may be going through a similar experience, it is the little things like the earrings, that you talk about. And it's, it may seem insignificant for me, right? I know. For me, I went out, and as soon as I was excommunicated from the faith, I went out and bought Michael Jackson CDs and Def Leppard CDs and all the things I couldn't do before. And, people would probably think, oh my God, that's not a big deal. Why didn't you, book a trip to Vegas or do something? No, for me, it was the little things, right?
And that's what it was for me.
Yeah. And maybe that helps the transition too, right?
Yes, because I did it in small stages.
Yes. Yes.
Because I had a reputation. I was a guy. I was never effeminate. I was never gay. I was never a lot of things. I was a traditional man. I shocked a lot of people when I came out. So in order for me to make this easier on people, my coworkers, people in the community, I did things very slowly and very gradually. Men get their ears pierced. A lot of guys get their ears pierced. Mm-hmm. So it was something that, something I always wanted to do, and I could get away with it. They had a little questions as my hair grew out and it got longer, and I had to put it in a bun for work. That raised a little bit of questions, but as my body was physically changing, that had some other questions that had to be dealt with. But it was the little things that really gave me the confidence that I knew I was on a path. Mm-hmm. And that's what made the difference to me.
So Kelly, we've talked about emotions, and in my practice, I hear men express shame and guilt when it comes to emotions. As a male, suppressing emotions was something you were accustomed to doing, and it seemed natural. Obviously, like you said, it's not going to click in. You're not just going to shift to, okay, I'm now able to let the emotions flow, and that's a societal perhaps expectation but what helped you to ease in to being a more emotional person?
In my era, growing up, young boys were not taught to express emotions. And that's very true even today. The message that many boys get is that big boys don't cry. Suck it up. Suck up the pain. Don't be a sissy. Only sissies cry. Mm-hmm. Boys are taught to be tough, to be strong, to be leaders, and never to be perceived as weak. I think it's misleading to say that men don't express emotions, because they do, mm-hmm. but they express it much differently than women.
Well said.
I've always envied women in many ways. Women group.
Yes.
Men cave. And what that means is when women are going through a difficult time emotionally, women seek out other women for emotional support and comfort. You get together with your girlfriends. You go out for lunches. You go out for dinners. You have a good cry fest. And women have been taught to do that. Many men, we shut ourselves down. I remember when I was going through my second divorce, I have a furniture refinishing business. And I was literally down in my workshop by myself in my cave, alone, no support, no help. And so that's an issue that men have. I think some men do have close support with other male friends, but we're not going to get together in a group and have a group chat about it.
Yeah.
It's going to be more one-on-one. Maybe we go out and have a drink with our guy friend. Or maybe we get together at a party and we talk one-on-one more personally. And these are men that you have built up a long-term friendship with. And having worked some of the jobs I have, you know, I know how we talk when we're on the job together. But, you know, maybe you go out and just have a drink, or you have that one-on-one conversation. You're not going to get together with a lot of friends. And so I know I still struggle with being open and emotionally forthright because of my previous life. I know for me, expressing feelings of love is something that I'm not accustomed to. I have those feelings. But expressing them is not always easy. For me to tell someone that I love them, or to have that, accept that and given back in return. I know I am very cautious. I have not had anyone in my life other than my two little doggies for many years to have those feelings towards. And do I miss that? Yes, I do. But, you know, I'm not, I'm very cautious. I know for myself, and I can only speak for myself, I'm able to show emotions more subtly. I am really good at crying at movies. Just went to see The Lion King, the new version, and I was in tears throughout that. But they were tears of joy. They were tears of happiness. They were tears of remembering a movie from 25 years ago that I took my daughter to.
Aww.
And so they were good tears of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, being able to have those as a man is still, I'm glad I'm able to do that now.
Yes.
I'm able to have emotions with my two little doggies, Lexi and Sable. They bring such warmth and love and unconditional love that I can give them and they can give me. Mm-hmm. But I do laugh more. I do engage more in conversations, especially with other women. It's easier for me to fit in with other women, because I'm no longer viewed as that male threat invading their space. And it's nice to be able to be part of that female circle, if you will. And I just fit in.
Shift, right?
Yes.
Like, it's a blessing. Yeah.
It is totally.
Wow.
A quick story I've never really shared much, but in my previous life, we were doing training here in my village, in my town. And I was the only guy in a circle of about 10 other women. And the women, not to be condescending at all, they were talking about shoes.
Uh-huh.
I totally understood. And I wanted to join in because I understood. Oh yes, I love my espadrilles. I love my 2.5-inch heels, and but as a guy, I could not join that conversation.
Oh, that would be hard.
Even though I knew as much as they did. I could totally fit in. I had to excuse myself out of that conversation because I was the guy invading that female space.
Wow, that's cool.
Now I get to join in.
Yeah.
It's just been interesting, the transition, I will say that.
That's beautiful. So how can someone who is in a similar situation seek help, Kelly?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of ways. There are a lot of resources out there today, much more so than when I was going through my transition. I would say find a good support group in your area, whether it's an LGBTQ group, whether it's an online group, whether it's a Facebook group. There are a lot of support people out there. You have to find them. Find a good behavioral health counselor, someone who is skilled in the area that you require. Reach out and attend LGBTQ events. I used to say the hardest door to get out was my own front.
Wow. Powerful.
And it really held me back for a long time. If there are no support groups, start one. Know that you're not alone. For most of my life here in the Adirondacks, I knew I was the only trans person here. When I started the Gender Alliance, there are trans and LGBTQ people all over this area. If you're a parent, start a parent support group. There are so many parents out there with LGBTQ and trans children. Start one. Talk to your faith community, especially if they're open, welcoming, and accepting. Share your story. There are a lot of support mechanisms online today that we never had when we were growing up. Worst comes to worst, reach out to me. I would be glad to help. But there are supports out there. You have to find them, and they are there. For parents, a good place to start would be PFLAG, Parents, Family, Lesbian and Gay. GLAAD, GLAAD, Human Rights Campaign. There are so many national organizations. See what's going on in your province, in your state, in your regional area. They're out there.
That's great, Kelly. When I delivered workshops on establishing positive spaces in the workplace and helping, it was across the province that I ran webinars. And part of the issues that sometimes arise are, the colleagues want to be allies of members who are the LGBTQ plus community or their families, but they're often wondering how to respectfully address how the person would like to be referred to, he, she, etc. And that creates some discomfort. And so unfortunately, some isolate themselves from the individual, which is not ideal, because they're uncomfortable of having these conversations. So often just asking the person how they would like to be addressed or what would make them most comfortable helps. Maybe you can elaborate on that.
So actually, when you're talking about lesbian, gay, bi, or pansexual people, they most often identify as their sex assigned at birth.
Mhm.
So we can sort of eliminate the LGBT population from that question. What we're talking about is really the transgender and non-binary community. So there's a couple rules of thumb. The first would be to select the pronouns that you feel that that person is most trying to express as. So if you see me, hair, makeup, skirt, dress, heels, you can pretty much think that, oh, this is someone who's expressing as female. I will address her as she, her, hers. Conversely, if you have a trans man who is short hair, traditional male type clothes, maybe facial hair, maybe not, you can try he, him, his. If you're really not sure, and that's fine, ask us in a very private setting.
Beautiful. Good point.
Say, I want to be respectful of yourself and who you are. One good way to do that is when you introduce yourself to someone,
Mhm.
you could say, hi, I'm Samantha Gomez. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Lovely.
You are telling that person right off the bat in your introduction who you are and how you identify. They, in turn, will most likely say, oh, thank you, Samantha. I'm Kelly Metzgar. My pronouns are she, her, and hers also.
What a
And
refreshing way of doing
that.
it if we could introduce ourselves in the regular world like that.
Exactly. So if you're not sure, ask someone personally and privately.
Mhm.
I want to be respectful. What are your preferred gender pronouns? They will tell you. And then you use them. You don't do this in a group. If you're standing around with 5, 10 other people, you don't say, oh, by the way,
Oh my Lord.
who are you? What are you? How do you want to be addressed? That is not appropriate.
No.
Ask someone privately, personally, what is your preferred name? What are your preferred pronouns? They will most likely be very happy to give those to you, and then use them. It is really that simple.
Beautiful. So I think because of time, we're going to ask one more question because I think this is fitting and it ties in with what we've been talking about. How can a workplace be sensitive and supportive to an employee going through a transition?
And having done that, I can tell you firsthand.
Please.
Part of the work that I do is professional development training, especially for trans people coming out on the job. Work with a professional consultant experienced in gender transition in the workplace. You want to ensure that successful win-win for the employee and for the organization. Work with the employee to find out what they want. This is their transition. They need to have a say in that process. The organization that I worked for previously, they assumed because they were in charge, they knew how to do it. They refused to work with my mentor. And it was not a very good process. So do a professional development training for the organization to understand what it means to be LGBTQ in the workplace, especially focusing on transgender or non-binary issues. This includes diversity, inclusion, be respectful for others in the workplace, work with employees to create a program where they feel safe. Work with the employees' time frame for when they want to arrive on the job in their preferred gender. But that has to be balanced between what the employee wants, which is they want it right away, and what the organization needs in order to do this formal training.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be a balance. I know when I transitioned on my job, I gave my employer a 3-month notice, 90 days. They still were not able to meet that 90-day threshold. It actually went into 3.5 months, and I basically said, no more extensions. Kelly is coming to work on such and such a day. But the employee and the employer have to work together on that time frame. And the employer has to work diligently. They need to update the corporate policy and procedure manuals. Many of those corporate manuals do not include transitioning for transgender employees.
Good point.
You have to ensure that the organization's insurance policies cover transition-related expenses, pre-op, post-op, during that period. The medical costs have to be covered under the insurance programs. You have to have and give that employee time off.
Mm-hmm.
For all these medical appointments that have to be taken into consideration. There's behavioral health meetings that have to take place with trained professional counselors. There's doctor's office visits that have to be done. There's the surgery itself. There's the aftercare follow-up. So your leave policy has to be able to take this into account and not penalize the employee for that. Just as you would for any major surgical procedure. If you had a heart attack, if you had a liver transplant, a kidney transplant, you have to make allowances for that. You have to make sure that the employee their privacy is respected. Here in the United States, we have something called HIPAA. Which is our Health Insurance Portability Act. But it basically covers privacy of medical history. So that has to be preserved at all times. My previous employer wanted to violate my HIPAA protections and regulations, and I would not let them do that. Work with other employees in the organization, because not only does that one person transition, but everyone around them now has to get used to a totally different person. And as I say all the time, if you're lesbian, gay, bi, or pan, you look like you look.
It's true. Mm-hmm.
But when you come out as trans male or trans female, everything about you changes. How you look, how you dress, how people relate to you. So people all around you have to transition as well. And that has to be done throughout the organization. You have to have provisions for legal name change. Many trans people change their names after they transit. How do you do that? In the employee records, in the insurance records, in the employment records. All these records have to be changed. So there's quite a few areas that constantly have to be looked at. And you have to have a policy, so if people refuse to respect that gender change or respect to use that preferred name or pronoun, depending on the state you live in, that could be sexual harassment that employee could file against the employer. So you want to safeguard that. You want these protections in place for the organization, for the employee, and for everyone there. So it is a process. That's one of the reasons I do my professional development trainings, to help the employee as well as the employer through this transition period.
Wow, Kelly, a wealth of information and so practical for the workplace and for
Thank
those that are listening. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You know, I appreciate your friendship and I admire your courage in not only sharing your story with me, but in your willingness to share it with all those that are listening, so that it may help those that are perhaps seeking answers and are feeling, you know, similar pressures as to not knowing which way to turn and how to deal with it, or family members and friends of someone that is dealing with a similar situation. So, Kelly, please let the audience know how they can get a hold of you if they have any questions or they'd like to know more about the work that you do.
The easiest way to get a hold of me is by email. The Adirondack North Country Gender Alliance, you can find that on Facebook. Our email address is basically our letters, ancga@outlook.com. We will be launching our website here within the next few weeks. So you'll be able to search for that online here shortly. But the easiest way to get a hold of me is by email, ancga@outlook.com. Would love to work with any person or organization in terms of LGBTQ, transgender, non-binary advocacy, and professional development training going forward.
Thank you, Kelly. And myself, I have my own coaching practice and facilitation practice, so I can be reached at samanthagomez.ca, or my email address is coach@samanthagomez.ca, and Gomez is with a Z. So again, I want to thank all of our audience members for staying with us through this conversation, and I hope that this video reaches those that need it most. Please share, like, and send it to those that you feel need it. And Kelly, again, thank you so much for sharing your extraordinary story. And you know what? I wish you many years of happiness and joy.
Thank you, Samantha. It's always a pleasure to chat and with you, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this process. It's amazing.
Thanks, Kelly.